Hello, Mr. Abhishek, am I audible? Okay, okay, fine. Okay, so yesterday we discussed it regarding Bitcoin transaction cycle, and we have seen how a cryptographic hash puzzle looks like, what is a nonce, what is a difficulty. Okay, and then we understood the fork, soft fork, and hard fork, and we also saw mining pools. So with that, almost all concepts of Bitcoin are done. And to give you a brief, Bitcoin is a peer-to-peer cash system where there is a currency which is maintained by public and which is used by public and validated. So all the transactions also validated by nodes which are maintained by general public. And who is taking the lead? It is taking protocol is taking the lead. So in 2009, when Bitcoin got started, slowly it got spread and people started knowing about it. Okay. And then there is one 19-year-old guy who is Vitalik Buterin, who was roaming around the world, and he is sharing the knowledge of Bitcoin with everyone. So he came to know about Bitcoin when he is 19, and he got enthusiastic with it, and he got excited with the possibility of what Bitcoin can do in this world. And he started writing articles about Bitcoin, and for the articles which he write, for the blog posts which he write, he used to charge in Bitcoins. So rather than taking general money, he used to take Bitcoins for his efforts. Okay, so that is when he got an idea, why only currency on blockchain? Why only currency on blockchain? And that is the idea with which he started exploring, why can't blockchain can be used for non-financial things or anything of value. So say for example there is a asset. Okay, now if there is a asset may be a land, a asset may be a certificate. Okay, a asset may be a good, or it may be gold, diamond, whatever it is. Even all these things should be transferred in a immutable way, right? They should not double spend it, right? We know today, just take land records as example. There are many people who have duplicates of land records, and uh, the old land records are pretty much duplicated, and that is the loophole which is being used by many. But at least if we start using blockchain to issue land records now at this point of time, in future there won't be any land disputes, or there will not be any collusion of some official people in the process. So recently there is a case somewhere in I don't remember if that is in Telangana, where there is a Tahsildar who is involved in the uh, duplicate creation of land records, and he is involved in the land deal of some 53 acres or so. See, in spite of digitalization, in spite of technology being used, still there are some officials who are misusing or who are duplicating documents or assets which are important, right? So there are many cases where it's not currency which has the problem of double spending, but there are many other things where the problem of double spending is there. And that is when Vitalik Buterin came with Ethereum, the second largest public blockchain. Okay, and today we'll start understanding Ethereum. Okay, so just give me a moment. I'll share the screen. Okay. So now Ethereum is a general purpose blockchain. Okay. When I say general purpose blockchain, in Bitcoin, you can't build applications on top of Bitcoin network. All you need to do is you can log in as a user to create a wallet, okay, or you need to maintain node to validate the transactions and do mining, right? Only these are the two possibilities. But with Ethereum, the concept of smart contracts functionality, scripting functionality is given for general user so that people can build applications on top of blockchain. And this Ethereum came into force in 2015. Okay, and the concept paper is launched somewhere in 2014. And you know what? In Ethereum, every node is a virtual machine. And every virtual machine will have its own operating system. And on top of that operating system, there is a scripting functionality or a programming language functionality given for programmers to build applications. And that is why Ethereum is an open source public blockchain which has operating system featuring smart contract functionality. What is a smart contract? I think in our initial discussions, I told you every transaction happens when there are some rules or when there is a logic, a business logic or an agreement between the stakeholders or the users. So in Bitcoin, you can do only transactions. That's it. You can't do any other functionality in Bitcoin because other than sending and receiving coins, you as a user can't do anything. But on Ethereum, you can write some conditions and say, hey, only if these conditions are met, then transaction should happen. So such kind of programmability or writing or defining the conditions is possible on Ethereum. So you can think Bitcoin as blockchain 1.0 and Ethereum is blockchain 2.0. And what is the major difference? You have an ability to write conditions based on which transactions can happen. And you can define an asset based on which you can initiate transactions. Okay, so that is what makes Ethereum a general purpose public blockchain. Okay, and like how we have Ethereum, how we have Bitcoin as a currency for mining, Ethereum blockchain is also maintained by general public. And for these nodes of Ethereum, the currency is Ether. So if a miner is maintaining a node, or sorry, if a peer is maintaining a node in Ethereum network, for every block addition, the reward will be in ethers. So Ether is also a cryptocurrency like Bitcoin. Okay, but Ethereum blockchain network is separate from Bitcoin blockchain network. Why? Because Ethereum has its own protocol, its own scripting functionality, and its own nodes. Okay, so I hope you understood each blockchain is unique in its own way. Okay, and Ethereum is a different blockchain compared to Bitcoin. Now, what is Ethereum called in a technical perspective? If you look at Ethereum, Ethereum is nothing but a secured, decentralized, generalized transaction ledger. Okay, why is it called as generalized transaction ledger? Because in Bitcoin, it's decentralized transaction ledger, that's it. But here, a concept of generalized transaction is coming. Say, for example, All the laptops which you use today, all the personal computers which you use today are called as general purpose computers. Why are they called as general purpose computers? Because by using the same computer, a gamer can download a game and play game. A student can download Zoom and can listen to classes. Okay, a corporate employee can download, install Excel, and he can do some computations on Excel data. So why is it called as a general purpose computer? Because each user can do whatever application he wants to use on it. Similarly, on Ethereum, people can, developers, so in Bitcoin it is either nodes or users, but in Ethereum, nodes, users, developers. And what can developers do? They can build applications on top of Ethereum. Okay, and this, in deep tech or computer science way, Ethereum is called as a transactional singleton machine with shared state. I'm sure most of you know our general purpose computers are called as state machines. Why they are called as state machines? Because whenever some operation happens on a data, the state of the data changes. That is why it is called as a state machine. But why Ethereum is called as a shared state machine? Because every transaction on Ethereum will create a state change. And this state change is maintained by all the nodes in the network. That is why it is called as a singleton machine with shared state. Like how Bitcoin saves all the transactions happening on the network on its local copy. Similarly, Ethereum, all nodes will maintain the state changes of every data. Okay, and I told you already, Ethereum is a project which attempts to build the generalized technology. Okay, you will understand more as we go deeper. And anyways, we are going to do some hands-on, which will be starting in a couple of days. Okay, now states. What is this state? In Bitcoin, there is no concept of state, because it is just unlocking or locking a coin, a currency, and just transfer of ownership from one public address to another public address, right? So, but if you look at Ethereum, it is a state machine, because here you are not only doing transactions on currency, you might be storing a document which is important. And whenever a document is transferred, say for example, again example of university certificate, a university is issuing a certificate to a student. It's a transaction of a document from one organization to other user. So imagine if the document got edited or updated. Now in Bitcoin, in blockchain, there is no concept of updating. But what if a certificate has a error or a certificate has some problem? What should the university do? It should create a new transaction with new certificate, but old certificate will remain the same. So the point is, now if you want to get your certificate to be verified, you need to share the latest transaction data. Okay, and through API, if the application is fetching transaction ID of old record, you can point it to recent record also. So such programmability is possible on Ethereum. So that is why if a document state is changing, that state change can be captured on Ethereum network. Okay, and second thing, now imagine you took example of university certificate, and it is only one organization to other user the certificate will be issued, right? But if you look at supply chain, for example, okay, actually supply chains use private blockchain. So rather than supply chain, yeah, let me take land record only, best easy example. Okay, now there is a ownership transfer. Okay, from X to Y, the land ownership was transferred, and that is captured on blockchain, on Ethereum blockchain. Now second time, the same land record ownership is getting transferred from Y to Z. So isn't that a state change? Yes, the document remains the same. The land record remains the same, but the ownership gets transferred. So every transition or every transaction on a asset in Ethereum will bring a state change, and that state change is what is captured on block. Okay, sorry, that state change is what is maintained by all the nodes in the network. Now, like how we have in Bitcoin Genesis block, similarly in Ethereum you have Genesis state, because that is the first empty state where there are no transactions, and every time couple of transactions change, there is a state change in the network. Okay, now I told you already Ethereum is also a blockchain. So because Ethereum is also a blockchain, of course there will be transactions which will be pooled for a given time slot. A block will be created, hash value is calculated, and it will be put in the next block. So all the other concepts remain the same. The only additional functionality is programmability. Next, even in Ethereum, fork concepts can happen, soft forks can happen, and longest chain is called as canonical blockchain. Okay, so the longest chain is called as canonical blockchain, and any block which is being added to the longest chain is deemed to be correct and reward will be given. Okay, so, and I think the tree, like I told you, right, Merkle tree and some tree structure is used. So for that also, the longest chain in technical terms is called as ghost, and ghost is nothing but greedy heaviest observed subtree. So whatever is the longest tree is called as ghost. Okay, the higher the block number, the longer the path, and the greater the minor effort that must have gone into arriving at that leaf. So nothing but I told you tree, right? So all at the bottom you will have leaves. Leaf is nothing but the transactions. Okay, now if you look at Ethereum ecosystem, these are the important line items we need to discuss. Okay, and if you look at Ethereum ecosystem, one of the first important thing is accounts. Unlike Bitcoin, in Ethereum the concept of accounts is there, but in blockchain, in Bitcoin there is no concept of accounts. It is just which the UTXO concept will drive the Bitcoin, but in Ethereum there is no concept of UTXO. No concept of UTXO. Then who will maintain the state changes? Every node in the network. How? Associated with every account. So every account will have its own state changes which will be captured. Okay. The second difference is smart contracts. Bitcoin, there is no programmability. You need to just use it. That's it. But in Ethereum, as a developer, you can build applications and users can use it. And every time a smart contract is used by a user, the user is supposed to pay Ether, pay in Ether. Say for example, you are using some software like Zoom. Let's take example of Zoom. Now for every time for monthly, Zoom charges some money to the host, right? Similarly, you can build a video conferencing application on Ethereum also, and every time a user hosts a meeting, the application will charge in Ether rather than charging in fiat currency. So like that, you can build applications on Ethereum, and the services with which you write are called as smart contracts, and a group of smart contracts together will create DApp, decentralized application. Okay, and the third important thing is virtual machine. The concept of virtual machine has come in Ethereum because the functionality of scripting is possible only when there is a virtual machine. Okay, because at the end of the day, if you want to if you want to execute and compile a program, the program should be compiled to generate a bytecode, and that bytecode should be executed by some operating system. So all that thing is created as a stack, and that is given as a virtual machine. So every node will install the Ethereum virtual machine. But previously, you need to download the client application and connect with the network. Protocol will take care everything in Bitcoin. But in Ethereum, that's not the case. Each machine should have virtual machine. What virtual machine? EVM, Ethereum virtual machine. Then only they can connect with the network and they can execute the smart contracts, or they can mine Ether, and they can validate the transactions. Fourth, transactions in Ethereum are also unique. Like how you do general transactions from wallet to wallet, in Ethereum also you can do Ether transactions from wallet to wallet. Other than that, you can write some conditions in a smart contract, and you can trigger a smart contract which can automatically initiate the transactions. Okay, so say for example, there is a electronic vehicle, EV. Okay, sorry, electrical vehicle. Now the electrical vehicle will not have any driver. Now it went to a petrol station. Sorry, not petrol, charging station. And once the car goes to a particular position, the electric magnetic charger will get into it and it will charge it. And based on the charging, a smart contract can automatically trigger a transaction of payment between electrical vehicle and the charging station account. Account is nothing but wallet. Every account has a wallet. See the beauty. If there are no humans and I want to facilitate a transaction, you can automate those transactions in a trustworthy way using Ethereum. Okay. It's not another name, it's technical name. So longest chain is in general functional level if you are talking, but Ghost is the technical name. Next, block details. We'll see how a block looks like in Ethereum. Then we'll see the transaction execution, Ether, and then gas. I'll explain gas. What is this gas? Okay. Now this gas is not the gastric trouble, but gas is concept used in Ethereum, which is to calculate the transaction fee. Now, in blockchain, the transaction fee is calculated as a percentage of the total amount which is being transferred. But in Ethereum, some conditions are written, right, to initiate a transaction. Now, a smart contract is written to put conditions and then initiate a transaction. That's fine. But some transactions may be huge, some transactions may be small. Smart contracts will be like medium, like 100 lines, 200 lines. Some may be 1,000 lines. So then in that case, each smart contract will be executed by all the nodes in the network to validate a transaction. In that case, for a given transaction, the computation power which is consumed by all the nodes in the network will be different. So the transaction fee should be different for different smart contracts. So that is why the concept of gas is used in Ethereum. So we'll discuss gas in detail. Then client application. So using Go programming language, there is a client application developed for Ethereum, which is called as Geth. And during the hands-on sessions, we'll help you to understand and download Geth to do mining of Ether. Okay. So we'll create a private Ethereum network. Okay, not a, I mean dummy Ethereum network, not the, we won't connect to the original net, because for that again it will take a lot of time for mining to happen. But we'll help you understand how Ether can be mined, how Ether can be transacted from one node to other node. Okay, so sorry, one wallet to other wallet. So all these things you will understand, you will do it. And then the last thing is dApps. So I already gave explanation of dApps. What is a dApp? A dApp is an application whose backend is blockchain. And when I say blockchain, it is Ethereum. It's not Bitcoin, because on Bitcoin, you can't build any applications. Next. Okay. So there are two types of accounts in Ethereum. One is called as externally owned account. Second one is called as contract account. So in externally owned account is nothing but a wallet kind of thing, where you can hold ethers, and it is controlled by private key. Like externally owned account can be compared to wallet. Both are same. But in Ethereum, there is second type of account, which is called as contract account, which are controlled by their contract code and have code associated with them. So for every smart contract, there will be a contract account, and each contract account will have a wallet associated with it and code associated with it. Okay, so say for example, you want to issue your, so there is a online cohort, consort, or your college is organizing a consort. Just imagine your university. Now, when your university is organizing a fest and they're trying to do a concert, they want to issue all the tickets on Ethereum platform. Imagine, to avoid duplicacy of the tickets. So they will write a smart contract. They will write a user interface from where you can log in, you can buy using Ether, and you can pay. So all the transactions related to issuance of tickets will be deposited in the contract wallet or contract account. Okay, so a contract account is nothing but it is controlled by code. So it will make sure that the public address is correct, private key is correct. Okay, these are the tickets which are issued to that particular person. See, there are many cases where in consorts by probably A. R. Rahman and some like super good people, duplicates of tickets happen. And after going to the consort at the gate, they will realize that those tickets are issued by some sites which are duplicates. So the same serial number is issued again and again. But if you are doing it with blockchain, for a given serial number, there is only one ticket issued, and for that one ticket issued, there will be a public address associated with it. So based on the public address, you can quickly verify whether that person owns the account or not. How? Enter the private key, validate that you are the owner of that. So this kind of double spending of tickets, double spending of land, double spending of whatever asset it is, Those things can be eliminated by writing smart contracts. Second, what are the kinds of transactions which can happen in accounts? There are two types of transactions. One is externally owned account to externally owned account. This is like wallet to wallet transactions. Like how transactions happen on Bitcoin, similarly on Ethereum also, Ether can be transferred from one externally owned account to another externally owned account. And this transaction will be validated by all the nodes in the network and confirmation comes, then transfer of Ether happens. But other than this, the new transaction is nothing but a externally owned account can initiate a transaction to contract account, and a contract account can initiate a transaction to another contract account also. For example, in the recent example which I gave, I have a Ether in my wallet. I want to buy a ticket and I want to validate that whether the ticket is issued, the same serial number is issued to anyone else or not. So two smart contracts are written. Now I will initiate a transaction to buy a ticket from this smart contract issuer. So there is no ticket issuance platform, centralized ticket issuance platform. When there is a centralized ticket issuance platform, duplicates happen. But if it is driven by smart contracts on blockchain, there will be only one ticket for a given serial number. And then there will be an internal transaction between two contract accounts to verify whether same serial number is used previously or not. So those conditions you can write in smart contract. Okay, because here ticket is the asset you are defining. Ticket is the asset which is transferring from one hands to other hands. It's not only currency. Okay, I hope you are able to understand the crux of what is a major difference between Bitcoin and Ethereum. On Ethereum, you can define an asset, you can write conditions of transfer of asset, and you can maintain the records of transfer of assets on blockchain. Okay, next. So this is the example I was talking about. For example, a smart contract is nothing but an option contract written as code into a blockchain, and contract is part of public blockchain. So last time someone was asking if a smart contract can be deleted or not possible, because a contract is part of the public blockchain. And do you think code will be saved in the language which you write? No. Once you write a smart contract, the contract will be compiled and it will generate ABI, application binary interface, and bytecode. So the bytecode, which is again binary data, will be stored on all the nodes in the network. Okay, and even bytecode of a smart contract also has some size limitations. It should be some 3 KB, 10 KB. So there are some limitations. Okay, based on that, you need to write the smart contract. And you can write smart contract for every simple action. For small services, you can write different smart contracts. Now again, you may get it out. So today I wrote a smart contract saying the ticket price is $2. Now I want to change it. What should I do? Create a new smart contract. That's it. And whenever from the front end, if a user clicks on it, point it to new contract. The new contract will be executed. But you can't change or edit the old smart contract. Okay, so now there is a band, the consort website. You will click on purchase, and there is a smart contract function called purchase album. A transaction happens, then you will click, so a new ticket will be generated, and you will enter your public. So once the transaction is confirmed, okay, you will enter your details, okay, your ethereum address and private key, and you will say click on claim and ship, and it will check whether the purchase is done by that particular public address or not. Then the ticket will be issued and you can check whether. So once you click on prove purchase, in that account, if the serial number comes, that means you are the true owner of the ticket. And this same contract, a simple contract, can be used in many scenarios. A international conference ticket. For an international conference, there will be different citizens from different countries will be coming for an international conference, right? So some people should buy in dollars, some people in euros, some people in some other currency and all. Now imagine if BTC, Bitcoin or Ethereum, not Bitcoin, sorry, Ethereum can be used as a global currency for issuing international conference tickets, then people can easily do it, right? Right, they need not worry about conversion fee, whether PayPal support is there or not, whether they have credit card or not. All these things can be eliminated directly. And opening a Ethereum account is as easy as opening a Gmail account. But applying for credit card, it's a tough thing again, right? Okay. So a contract is nothing but it executes itself when the conditions are met. And regulators use blockchain to keep an eye on contracts. Now imagine chit funds on blockchain. Now every chit fund company is supposed to maintain a fund size of only X amount. So a small chit fund company should maintain only corpus of 1 crore. So beyond that amount, they are not supposed to do any transactions. Now, if such transactions can be, I mean, they need not be on Ether only. Don't imagine for every transaction only Ethereum is to be used. Okay, so you can build smart contracts. The payment gateway link will be different, but the contracts, the amount which is being moving from one person to other person, those numbers can be captured on blockchain. So you can choose what you want to put on blockchain. And then government can, regulators is nothing but government. So governments can use blockchain to keep an eye on contracts, saying, okay, this is a smart contract of chit fund company X, and it has a limit of only maintaining the fund of 1 crore. Okay, now let me check if the transactions are all good or not. But what happens in reality? The chit fund company will do whatever amounts it want and all. At the end of the year, they will submit a report to regulator that, okay, these are the amounts. So by that time, they change the data, they manipulate the data. But using blockchain, you will not find it later, but you will prevent it before only. So beyond that amount, if some transaction is to happen, then automatically the smart contract will not get executed and regulator will get an alert. Now already some governments are already doing chit funds on blockchain. Okay. What happens if we write the malicious code? See, malicious code is nothing but something in loop or something in what to say. So those are the kind of attacks which happened in Ethereum 2012, right? Ethereum Classic. There is a hard fork from Ethereum Classic to Ethereum. So there are some rules, functionalities which are well defined, which can be accommodated in smart contracts. So over a period of time, the standards of writing a smart contract, issuing a token, defining a asset. So all these things are well defined. So unless until you use those functions, unless until you do them, it should be able to maintain the gas. See, if you write malicious code, for every execution, the smart contract account, okay, which you are creating, you will be bearing the costs. So indefinitely you can't execute some long smart contract. Okay, so if you try to write a malicious code and if you try to execute it, who will bear the costs? So there should be some ether in the account. That is where the concept of gas comes. So even if you want to do something wrong, who will bear the costs? You, not the user. Okay. No, no. In the chit fund company, each organization will maintain a node, and government also maintains the node. All the nodes will validate that malicious code. See, when a transaction happens from a smart contract account, then all the nodes in the network will execute the smart contract. And if the result is matching with what is sent, broadcasted, what is received, if both are matching only, then it will be validated. Otherwise, no. Okay. Is Ethereum the result of hard fork? Yeah, the present Ethereum is different from Ethereum Classic. Yes, so the present Ethereum is a hard fork. Amount should be paid for execution of smart contract. Yes, of course. Advantage of Ethereum over Bitcoin. Programmability. You can build applications on Ethereum, but you can't build any applications on Bitcoin. That is a major value proposition of Ethereum. Okay, clear? Yeah, I'll explain gas. Okay, don't worry. Any disadvantage? Disadvantage of Ethereum, only slowness. Today, every public blockchain is slow. But I think other than that disadvantage, there is no disadvantage as such in Ethereum blockchain. Okay. Ghost or canonical blockchain or long chain, all are same. There is no difference. Okay. Hard fork versus soft fork. Soft fork is nothing but when two nodes in the network solve the puzzle for same time. Hard fork is when the network splits because of protocol upgrade. Okay. Can you please give a brief explanation of the smart contract? So anyways, you will start writing the smart contracts in coming sessions. You'll get more clarity. So at a stretch, it will be tough for you to understand smart contract as a whole. Okay. So when you do the practicals, you will be writing the smart contracts. You'll get more clear understanding of it. Okay. So a smart contract is like your code only, a general C programming language. Similarly, here to write a smart contract, you need to learn Solidity. So Solidity is a programming language developed by Ethereum. So you will write programming in Solidity, you will compile it. So where will you write the code? There is a IDE, Integrated Development Environment. Like how you wrote Java code, C code in editor. Similarly, there is a editor for Solidity also, Remix. And once you write a smart contract, you will compile it. Then two things comes as output. Contract ABI, nothing but application binary interface. Second thing is contract bytecode. And this bytecode, once triggered, a transaction will happen. And for a corresponding contract address, a state change will be recorded. Okay. And whenever a transaction happens by triggering of a smart contract, in order to validate the output, all the nodes in the network will execute this contract code. And all the nodes will compare the received transaction output with smart contract execution output. If both outputs match, they say it as correct. Otherwise, they will reject it. So That is why the moment, see, in the blockchain, the moment you execute a smart contract, the smart contract will be executed by all the nodes in the network. Because anything on blockchain is through consensus, right? So what is the advantage? The smart contract output is validated and it is robust. No one can fool it. But what is the disadvantage? We should not say it as disadvantage, but all the nodes in the network are executing the same contract once everyone, right? But that itself is the benefit of decentralization, right? So that is not a disadvantage. That is the purpose of decentralization, a decentralized network. Okay. So next point is account state. So if you look at account state, externally owned account or contract account, both will have 4 fields. Okay. One is nonce, balance, code hash, storage root. This storage root is like Merkle root. Like yesterday I explained you Merkle root, like similarly storage root also a similar kind of root with which the code hash can be verified. Okay, so externally owned account is like a wallet. Okay, a wallet will not have any code associated with it. That is why for externally owned account, code hash is a null number, is a null. Okay, can you please give brief? Okay, Remix. The Remix is the IDE for writing smart contracts. Okay, can the data be shared among a public and private blockchain network? No, not yet. So actually, interoperability between public blockchain and private blockchain, there is a new platform called as Hyperledger Besu, but still it is under work. I mean, things are still under process. At this point of time, no one is using a interface between public and private blockchain. Okay, amount should be paid for execution of smart contract. So Monish Babu, I answered this already. Yes, for every execution of smart contract, the account which is triggering the transaction should bear the costs. Okay. Now let's look at each field. What is the use of each field for every account? No. Transactions can't happen BTC and ETH. No. If you want to swap them, you need to go and buy on exchange. There is a crypto exchange where conversion from one cryptocurrency to other cryptocurrency can happen. But two blockchains communicating with each other and doing a transaction, no, not possible. Okay. Why is the value of Ethereum less than Bitcoin in spite of having a programming advantage? Because Ethereum is infinite. There is no hard cap on Ethereum. Okay, like how on Bitcoin we have 21 million BTC, right? But Ethereum there is no such a thing. Then you may get it out then why Ethereum is used, because everyone who want to use a dApp should spend some ETH to run to do a transaction. So it is more of a vehicle. Okay, Ethereum is like a vehicle. Okay, so vehicle is uh, like as long as you want you fill petrol you can use the vehicle. So that is the kind of approach Ethereum has. But Bitcoin is more on a currency aspect of it, currency side of it. Economics plays a role there. Okay, so that is the main difference, Venkata. Did you understand? So what is nonce? So if the account is an externally owned account, this number represents the number of transactions sent from account's address. Okay. The nonce is basically just a counter that keeps, so this nonce and the puzzle nonce both are different. Okay, don't get confused. The nonce associated with account state is different from the nonce which I discussed for cryptographic hash puzzle. Okay, don't get confused. Okay, now what does nonce do? It will help to address the double spend problem. Why? For example, there is no concept of UTXO in Ethereum, right? I told you already. Now, if there is no concept of UTXO, I don't know if they are spent previously or not. Why? Because I can't go and see, if there is something locked to that particular address or not, nothing like that. Right? Here in Ethereum, you can do something which is not currency related also. You can maintain a document and you want to do the state changes, you want to track the state changes. So because there is no concept of UTXO in Ethereum, it has a account with nonce. What does nonce do? Say for example, I'll give you an example. Suppose an address A has 1 ETH, okay, 1 ether. First, it tries to send 1 ether to address B. Let's call this transaction A naught because it was signed by A and it has nonce 0. So the first nonce will have 0 as its number and A because A signed it. So A naught is the nonce. Sorry, transaction. Second, now if A tries to double spend this 1 ETH, so now he did it, and unless until the transaction is confirmed by all the nodes in the network, the balance of A is still 1 ETH only, right? Right? In that time span of 10 minutes, okay, he tried to double spend it. So he has transferred 1 ETH to B. Still the confirmation is pending. In that meanwhile, he tried to double spend by sending another transaction of 1 ETH to C. Now in that case, the nonce will be 1. Okay, and A1 will be rejected immediately by all nodes because every node can see that A1 must come after A naught. Okay, so the first transaction A naught, till it gets confirmed, A1 will not happen. So even if the transaction is received by nodes, A1 will be rejected outright. Okay, so I hope you got how the nonce in account will help us to solve the double spending problem in Ethereum. Because Ethereum don't have UTXO, this is the only method with which you can check whether some transaction happened on this already which is not yet confirmed. So that is why the nonce is associated with every account. So every account will have its own nonce, and based on the nonce, it will check whether there is a recent transaction which is yet to be confirmed or not. Okay, so any questions on nonce? Are you understanding? Did you get what nonce and how nonce help? Okay. So nonce is associated with the account, not ether or not a transaction. Okay, so this is this is a very small difference, right? Yeah, nonce is associated with account. I told you, right? Account state, it is account state. In Bitcoin, every coin, so ownership is tracked. But in Ethereum, this is like our general bank account. Each account has its own state. And if all the previous transactions of that particular account are done, then nonce will be 0. But if there is one transaction which is pending, then nonce will be 1. So automatically the new transaction will be rejected outright. Okay, is it clear? Yeah, it's same for contract account also. Yeah, any account, the nonce concept remains the same. Its main purpose is to solve the double spending problem. Is it clear, guys? Hello. Okay, fine. Next, balance. Balance is nothing but the number of way owned by address. So ether has the denomination as way, like how 100 paisa is 1 rupee. Similarly, some 10 power some x is equal to way equal to 1 ETH. So that is why balance is counted as number of way owned by this particular address. Second, storage root. So storage root is the same thing, a hash of the root node of a Merkle tree. Okay, so I think I explained you what Merkle tree is. All transactions are hashed and two hashes of two transactions will be hashed again to create another hash on top of it and so on. So the root, storage root is nothing but root node of a Merkle tree. Okay, Merkle Patricia tree is a little different tree structure compared to Merkle tree. But we need not get into those details because we are not trying to understand the protocol or redesign a protocol. Okay. So what does the tree does? The tree encodes the hash of the storage contents of this account and is empty by default. Okay, and then comes code hash. What is code hash? For externally owned account, there is no code associated with it. That is why it is null, empty string. But for a account, contract account, there will be code. So the value of the code is hashed again, and that is called as code hash. So that's what Navya. So in Bitcoin, nonce decides the difficulty of puzzle. Okay. Even in Ethereum also difficulty concept is there. Mining, solving the puzzle. Even Ethereum also uses proof of work only. But this is account nonce. So in Ethereum, account nonce is nothing but the number of transactions which were initiated in this particular time slot. And all the transactions will be in queue. If the first transaction happens, then only the second transaction may be allowed or may not be allowed based on the balance. Okay. So is it clear? Okay. Okay. So Ethereum's global state consists of mapping between account addresses and the account states. Okay. So nothing but you need to understand every account has address and every account has a state associated with it. Right? So all these addresses and states are mapped to create a global state. Like how Bitcoin has UTXO, which is common for all the nodes in the network. In Ethereum also there is a global state which is common for all the nodes in the network. And this mapping is stored in a data structure known as Merkle-Patricia tree or Merkle tree. Merkle tree is a binary tree composed of set of nodes. Okay, So all the transactions or the state changes will be hashed, will be connected. Okay, again they will be mapped and so on. So like this, at the surface they are leaf nodes. As you go deeper, branch nodes. As you go more deeper, more branch nodes. And at the core you will have a root node. Okay, so this is how the data structure of maintaining the state changes for a corresponding account and for a corresponding address is maintained. So what is the benefit? See, what is the benefit of using Merkle tree? The benefit of using Merkle tree is, if I want to verify a transaction, okay, if you want to verify a transaction, okay, you can verify using the root hash directly. For example, imagine I want to check the integrity of the whole blockchain. Imagine, again I am repeating, if I want to check whether whole blockchain of all states, all transactions is intact or not. If I store it as a linked list, what happens? I need to check each and every transaction to see if whole chain is correct or not. But because of data is stored as a tree structure, if there is little change somewhere, then the root node changes directly. If the root node changes, then just by looking at the root node, I can check the integrity of all blockchain. And this is called as partial verification. Without actually verifying all the transactions in the network, I can check whether whole blockchain is correct or not. And that is what is the benefit of Merkle tree. So yesterday someone was asking, what is the benefit of using Merkle tree? If you use a linked list like one connected to next as a whole, if you want to check the integrity, you need to check integrity of each and every transaction in order. But in Merkle tree, you can do through partial verification. A small change somewhere will definitely bring change at root node. If root node is not matching, then I can definitely say there is something wrong. Then I will go deeper where that wrong happened or where that manipulation happened. Okay, so this is again a mathematical concept of Merkle proofs partial verification. Okay, so imagine there is a peer and all data, even though it is hexadecimal data, even though it is not visible, imagine some data got manipulated. Okay, imagine it was done intentionally. Because always if a system is being tested, all the bad situations or all the negative inputs also will be tested. So in order to check, in order to verify, if a peer is a untrusted peer and he has sent a data which is manipulated, if I want to check the authenticity of the chain which he is maintaining, I will use partial verification. Okay, so any questions on this? Okay, once again, okay. So say for example, there is a transaction 1, transaction 2, 3, 4. There are 4 transactions which happened. Okay, and hash value of those data is calculated as LRLR. Okay, now these two hashes are again calculated. So again hashed. Hash 1 and hash 2 are hashed again, which will give hash of hash 1 and hash 2. Similarly, hash 3 and hash 4 are hashed again. So which will give hash of h3 and h4. Now h of h1, h2, h of h3, h4, both are hashed again, which will give h of a comma b. So like this, a Merkle tree is created. Now this root is called as hash of a comma b. This is called as root hash. Okay. Now imagine there is one transaction h of 4 which is manipulated. Imagine, because there is a untrusted peer, he tried to change data, even though it will be rejected, but still he can change data, right? In its local copy, in his local copy he can change. Anyways it will be rejected, but still he because he is the owner of the node, he can try to change. But if he changes, what happens is the transaction data will create a different hash value, and this hash value will create a new hash at a branch level, and it will create a new root hash. And all other nodes in the network is having different Merkle tree, and there is one node which is having different Merkle tree. So the protocol should verify, right, which one is correct. So in that case, the partial verification is used, where the root hashes will be calculated. If root hash is correct, all the transactions are correct. If root hash is wrong, then it will go to next step, whether A is wrong, whether A is matching or E is not matching. So A is correct only. So it will not go to those transactions which are correct. It will go to B side. Then it will check, it will come to next level. So what is the benefit of this? You need not verify all the transactions. You can quickly go and verify partially, and you can check the integrity, and you can figure out where the mistake has happened or where manipulation happened. Anyways, protocol will see that, but still protocol also should have some mechanism to validate, right? So this is how it happens. Is it clear? No concept of Merkle root in BTC? No, it is there. Merkle root is there in Bitcoin also. Yesterday I explained. I don't know if you left the session. So someone reminded me about Merkle root. So I explained the Merkle root yesterday. Okay. Why is it called as partially verification? Because, okay, for example, I think I explained you right now. Okay, let me take my slate and I explain. Okay. Okay, before going to that, will there be one Merkle tree for every node? Yes, of course. Every node will maintain the whole blockchain, right? The ledger, the distributed ledger. Everyone will maintain the copy of distributed ledger. And they store the distributed ledger in a Merkle tree format, in a Merkle tree data structure. Okay. Hash of every node of tree is calculated after a single manipulation or addition of a node. Hash of every node of tree. Hash of every node of tree is calculated after a single manipulation. No, hash is see, transaction, once it is validated, it will be hashed and it will be broadcasted to all other nodes in the network. And all the hashes will be pooled. Then the hash of all transactions will be calculated, which is called as block hash. I am here just discussing the technical terminology. That's it. All these things we discussed already. Is it just required that 51% or all the nodes need to verify? No. For verification and addition of a block, all the nodes should agree. If some nodes get down in that particular time slot, whatever nodes in the network are there, they will come into consensus. And now the node which got down, if it connects back, it will sync the data. So the network will sync the data, and then only the recently joined node will participate in the next consensus mechanism. So for a node to participate in the consensus mechanism, it should have the recent block data, then only it can participate. So it should be in sync, then only it can participate. Okay, Ebenezer, so is it clear? Hello. Slate. So all the nodes in the network should validate a block and add, then only confirmation happens. Okay. So why is it called as partial verification? That is what I'll explain. Just give me a moment. I'm connecting the slate. Okay, now let's look at this. Say for example, blockchain is okay. See, you need to understand there is a block one. This block's hash value is stored in next block's hash value, block 2. So the hash pointer will be pointing to this. Hash pointer of block 3 will be pointing to block 2. Now we are talking about how the hashes are organized within a block. Now within a block there are many transactions, and each transaction also has a hash, right? Now if I now once this block is navigated, okay, once this block is navigated, is broadcasted to all other nodes, all the nodes will be validating the block. When I say validation of block, what exactly is happening? Partial verification is happening. Now I will explain you how these hashes are linked. These hashes of transaction 1, transaction 2, transaction 3, and transaction 4, all the hashes h of 1 comma h of 2 comma h of 3 comma h of 4. This is one way of calculating the block hash, but in reality this is not how the hash values are calculated. They are calculated as Merkle tree. There is h1 of transaction 1, h2 of transaction 2, then h3 of transaction 3, h4 of transaction 4. Now these two hashes will be calculated, h of 1 comma h of 2, h of h3 comma h4 is calculated. Then h of h1 comma h2 comma H of H3 H4 is calculated. So this is how the data structure or hashing is mapped. Okay, now imagine I want to verify and validate a transaction, and I want to find if some manipulation happened or not. In this case, what should I do? First, I need to calculate all hashes of individual transactions, and I need to calculate all hash value, and I will be calculating the H. If my calculation H and what is received, so there is a block which is received with hash value, and I am verifying it. So I will also calculate the hash value of all individual transactions received. I will calculate hash value and I will compare both. If both are matching, that's good. If both are not matching, I need to figure out which transaction is false. So if I were to figure out which transaction is false in this model, I need to check H1, I need to check H2, I need to check H3, H4, all the things I need to check. But in this model, if H is not matching, I will go and see if this is correct or this is correct. If this is correct, I will go and check only transaction 3 and transaction 4. I need not worry about this. So with partial verification only, you can check the integrity of the block. Okay, so that is what is partial verification. Is it clear? So there will be one Merkle tree structure for every block. Okay. There is no concept of unlocking and locking here. There is no UTX at all, right? I told you already. So it is account state norms which will decide whether state got changed or not. See, for example, so this is the Merkle root. Okay. This is the hash. Okay. So this hash is calculated as a whole, but for verification purposes, Merkle root is used. A descendant of all the hashed pairs in the tree. Okay. Now see, just remember D7 A D0. Okay. Now let me go to second block. See, the Merkle root is different. So each block will have its own Merkle root based on the transactions which it facilitated. This one, we're talking about these things, probably nonce, something which is not need not be calculated. Let's go to older things. So here only few zeros. Okay, difficulty is just one. So it depends. See, like I told you, right? So the number of zeros is again dependent upon the norms, the difficulty and all. No, it's not fixed. Why the number of zeros are fixed? No, it changes. It changes with time. Zeros are not fixed. See, hash value itself, hash function itself is a dynamic thing. Okay, you can't define that. Okay, sir, transaction volume is 0 here. Where? Transaction volume. Yes, right. This is first transaction. This is block 0. 50 BTC were created. Okay. So in that, as there are no transactions, only block reward is there, but there are no transactions. That is why transaction volume is 0. Now let's take some number. Okay, some block number. Now in this, okay, 1 second. Let's go to recent block. So here around 2338 transactions happened, and the transaction volume is this much. So in this block, the total amount which is transferred from multiple accounts to other accounts is 16,325 BTC. And the block reward is 6.25 BTC, and the transaction fee for this much amount is 1.132 BTC. So transaction volume is nothing but the amount which is transferred by multiple accounts in that. Okay. Why confirmation is number is not same for each block? Yes, of course. The recent block will have only one confirmation. The previous block will have two confirmations. I told you, right? Every time a new block is added, the number of confirmations on previous block will add by 1. So that is why the recent block will have confirmation of 1. I'll show you. See, this is recent. Confirmation, how many? 1. The second recent block, confirmations 2. The third recent 3. Okay, is it clear? Okay. So I think with this we understood majority of the concepts of Ethereum, and tomorrow we'll discuss. I think block header is also simple, right? State root, transaction root, receipts. These are like very complex things. Like the previous hash value is stored on recent block. and all the transactions within them will have a Merkle root. All block transactions are pooled like this, are structured like this, which will create a Merkle root. And every block header will have Merkle root. We just saw, right? Every block will have previous hash, nonce, timestamp, Merkle root. So this is how a typical block header looks like. These are like very deep concepts. All you need to understand is every transaction within are interlinked to state and address of every account. Okay. And tomorrow we'll start with gas. Okay. If you are developing a blockchain application, no, if you are developing an application, you should care about writing smart contract efficiently, because the less number of lines you use, the efficient, the faster it can be executed. Okay, so you can't decide the difficulty of puzzle. Always remember this. The protocol decides the difficulty based on different parameters which I discussed yesterday. Okay, as a developer you should focus on writing smart contracts with minimal lines of codes without compromising the functionality. Okay, is it clear? Okay, so I think, why roughly? Probably in a day or so, day or two, I'll explain smart contract in much detail. Okay. A smart contract is a self-executable code which has conditions written in it when a transaction should happen or not. Okay, that is very simple definition of smart contract. Okay, means we need to just use the existing protocol. Yes, of course, you need to use the existing protocol only. You can't go to protocol level and change something. Always remember, you can only write smart contracts on an application layer, not on a network layer. So any questions? Okay. So I think let's catch up on Monday. So anyways, tomorrow it's Vinayak Chaviti. So happy Vinayak Chaviti to everyone. So let's catch up on Monday. Okay. Happy weekend to everyone. And thanks Jagan Garu for hosting.
Thank you, Andy, and happy Vinayak Chaturthi, Arun Garu. And happy Vinayak Chaturthi to students also.
Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Welcome.